Silas Granger pushed the brim of his hat back, wiping the grit from his forehead with a forearm already slick with sweat. The sun in the late summer of 1877 was a merciless thing, a hot copper coin searing the Wyoming sky. Below him, the mountain pass was little more than a scar, a treacherous ribbon of crumbled rock and choking dust that threatened to break an axle or a mule's leg with every turn of the wagon wheels. His two mules, Jed and Samson, strained against their harnesses, their ears flicking back at the rattle of the wagon and the dry scrape of the brake shoe. He'd been on this road for 3 days, hauling feed from Cheyenne toward the thin, scattered settlements bordering the territory. It was hard country, a land that pared a man down to his essentials: bone, muscle, and whatever stubborn grit kept his soul from blowing away with the endless wind. Silas was suited to it. He preferred the company of his mules and the empty horizon to the crowded, noisy streets of a town. Towns meant people, and people meant questions. Silas kept to himself. He'd done so ever since the war, ever since he'd come back to find the world he left behind had closed up over his memory like a wound. He was a hay seller. It was simple. He cut, he baled, he hauled, he sold. It was an honest living that kept his hands busy and his mind just quiet enough. Most days, anyway. He shifted on the hard wooden seat, the movement causing the letter in his breast pocket to crinkle. It felt less like paper and more like a shard of glass, pressed flat against his ribs. It had been there for 3 weeks, unopened. The postmark was from Missouri, from a place he had not allowed himself to think of in almost 10 years. He knew who it was from, and knowing that, he knew he did not want to read the words inside, so he carried it, a small, square penance, letting its weight remind him of all the things he'd tried to bury. The pass finally widened, spilling him out onto a high, desolate plain. The mountains fell away behind him, bruised purple in the afternoon light. Ahead, the world was brown and thirsty. He pulled a worn timepiece from his trouser pocket. Just past 4 o'clock. He should make the Voss Ranch before dusk. He'd only heard of the place. Never been. It was isolated, tucked back against a line of low mesas, miles from the main road. The man who'd ordered the hay, Martin Voss, had done so by mail, the letter arriving 6 weeks prior with a bank draft for half the cost. The other half was due on delivery. It was a large order, more than a small rancher usually bought at once. Silas figured the man was stocking up, or perhaps ambitious. The turnoff was barely a track, 2 ruts half swallowed by sagebrush and cheatgrass. The land here was even drier, the ground cracked and pale. He followed the ruts for another 2 miles, the wagon groaning, until he crested a low rise and saw it. The Voss Ranch was a portrait of neglect. It wasn't just poor, it was dying. The main house, a small structure of sod and rough-cut timber, looked hunched against the wind. The fences were a joke, wires snapped and posts leaning at drunken angles. A dry creek bed, littered with bleached stones, snaked past the property. There was no green, only shades of yellow and brown. And the barn, it was a large structure, or had been. Now it listed hard to the east, as if a giant hand had tried to shove it over. Half the shingles were gone, leaving the roof looking like a snaggle-toothed mouth. Silas pulled his mules to a halt about 30 yards from the house. He saw no movement, no smoke from the chimney, no chickens scratching in the yard. The only livestock in sight was a single bony cow standing hip-shot in a roofless corral, staring at him with dull eyes. He wrapped the reins around the brake handle and set his foot on the wagon wheel, preparing to jump down. The front door of the house opened. A figure stepped out onto the porch, backlit by the dim interior. It was not the man he'd expected. It was a woman, and she was holding a shotgun, the barrel pointed loosely at the ground. She was young, maybe not even 25, but the land had already taken its toll. Her hair was a flat brown, pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin over her cheekbones. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem. She was thin, but not frail. She stood with her feet planted, her shoulders set, and her eyes, even from this distance, he could see they were fierce. They were the eyes of something cornered, wary and sharp, and expecting nothing but trouble. "You, Granger?" Her voice was clear, but flat. It didn't carry a welcome. Silas dropped to the ground, the dust puffing up around his boots. He kept his hands away from his sides, his coat open. "Ma'am, Silas Granger. I've got a wagon load of feed for a Mr. Martin Voss." The woman's expression did not change. Her gaze flicked from his face to the wagon, then back. "Mr. Voss is dead, been dead since March." Silas absorbed this. It explained the state of the place. "My condolences, ma'am. He ordered this hay back in June." "He was always buying things we couldn't pay for," she said. She shifted her weight, the shotgun still resting easy in the crook of her arm. "I'm Clara Voss, his widow. I suppose you're here for the rest of your money?" "I'm here to deliver the hay, ma'am, as agreed." "I don't need it all," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And I don't have the coin for it. I'll take half. That'll clear the deposit." Silas looked at the listing barn, then at the single cow. She didn't need a tenth of what was on his wagon, but a deal was a deal, and he disliked complications. Still, the order had been clear. The letter ordered a full load. I hauled a full load. I'm not hauling half of it back over that pass. He expected her to argue, to raise the gun, to tell him to leave. Instead, she stared at him for a long moment. He could see the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of options. Finally, she gave a short, bitter nod. "Fine, but you'll wait for the money. I have to fetch it." "I'll be paid before I unhitch," Silas said, not unkindly. It was just business. She turned without another word and went back inside the house. Silas waited. The silence of the place was heavy. He heard the scrape of something being dragged across a floor inside the cabin, then the clink of coin. She reappeared a few minutes later, walking directly toward him. She kept her left hand in her apron pocket. With her right, she held out a small canvas pouch. "It's all there, $20. He took the bag, loosened the drawstring, and checked the coin. It was a mix of silver dollars and smaller pieces. It looked right. He cinched the bag and tucked it into his trouser pocket. "Thank you, ma'am." "The barn loft is where it goes," she said, turning away. "I'll open the doors." Silas clicked to his mules and guided the wagon toward the leaning barn. The main doors were huge, built of thick planking, and they scraped over the hard-packed earth as Clara Voss shoved them apart. She was strong. He'll give her that. She put her shoulder into the wood and fought it open. He backed the wagon in, the interior of the barn swallowing them in shadows and the close, dry scent of old timber and dust. Light fell in dusty shafts from the holes in the roof and the gaps in the wall slats. It was cavernous inside, and mostly empty. A few broken tools in a corner, some empty stalls, a ladder leading up to the loft. "You'll have to stack it tight," she said. Her voice was sharp, tense. "Against the back wall." "It's my trade, ma'am," Silas said. He climbed onto the wagon, untied the ropes, and pulled his hay hook from where it was jammed in a bale. He tossed the first bale into the loft, the impact sending a cloud of dust motes dancing in the light. He worked steadily, rhythmically. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder and long in the arm, and the bales, though heavy, were familiar. He moved with an economy of motion, hooking, lifting, turning, and pitching. It was hot, stifling work. The air in the barn was thick and still. Clara Voss did not leave. She stood just inside the barn doors, half in shadow. She wasn't watching the hay, she was watching him. He worked, the sweat darkening his shirt, dripping from his chin. He could feel her gaze on him, steady and unnerving. It wasn't the way a woman usually watched a man. It wasn't curious or admiring. It was assessing. It was the way a person watched a strange dog. trying to decide if it was safe or if it would bite. He paused after clearing the first layer, breathing heavily, and reached for the canteen on the wagon. He looked at her. "You planning on standing there the whole time?" "It's my barn. I'll stand where I please." Silas took a long pull of the warm water, then capped the canteen. He saw it then. As she spoke, she'd shifted, and the light from the door caught her arms. She'd pushed her sleeves up while wrestling with the doors. On her left forearm, just below the elbow, was a dark, ugly bruise, the shape of fingers, a grip. It was yellowing at the edges, at least a few days old. As if sensing his gaze, she quickly pulled the sleeve back down, her movements jerky. She crossed her arms over her chest, her knuckles white. Silas said nothing. He turned back to the hay, but he was no longer just a man delivering feed. He was a man in a locked room with a story he didn't understand. He looked around the barn again, more slowly this time, and he saw the shotgun. It wasn't on the porch anymore. It was here, leaning against the wall in the deepest shadow, just inside the main door, close to where she stood. It was close enough to be grabbed in a second. He kept working. The rhythm of the work was a comfort. Hook, lift, pitch, hook, lift, pitch. But his mind was working, too. A dead husband, bruises, a shotgun in the barn while she was alone with a stranger. This was not just a widow struggling to keep her land. This was a woman expecting violence. He finished the last bale, tossing it up into the loft. He'd stack it later. He jumped down from the wagon, his boots hitting the dirt floor. "That's the load." "I'll need you to stack it proper," she said, her voice strained. "I'll stack it." He climbed the ladder to the loft. It was hotter up here, under the broken roof. He worked quickly, stacking the bales in tight rows against the far wall, leaving an alley for air. The whole time, he was aware of her, a still, silent figure by the door below. He could feel the storm in the air now, a change in the pressure, a heavy, electric stillness. When he climbed back down, the light in the barn had changed. The dusty shafts were gone, replaced by a dull, greenish gloom. The wind was picking up, whistling through the gaps in the walls. "Storm's coming in fast," Silas said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I'd best be on my way before that pass gets slick." He moved toward his mules, intending to lead them out. "Wait!" He stopped, turned. Clara Voss was staring at the open barn door, at the patch of darkening sky. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. "It's a bad one. You can wait it out in the house if you need." It was the first hint of softness, of common courtesy. He'd heard from her. He was surprised. "Appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I've slept in worse. I'll just be—" He never finished. She moved, not toward the house, but toward him. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something past him, out on the plain. She grabbed his arm. Her hand was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into his muscle. "What is it?" he asked. "Get in," she whispered. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command, raw with panic. "What?" "Get in, into the stall, now!" Before he could react, she was shoving him. She was fast, moving with a desperate energy. She pushed him back, toward the empty stalls at the dark end of the barn. "I said now!" "Ma'am, I don't—" She didn't wait. She ran back to the main doors. With a strength he wouldn't have believed she possessed, she hauled the massive doors shut, plunging the barn into near-total darkness. The thud of the wood vibrating was followed by a heavier sound, the unmistakable, final sound of a thick wooden bar being dropped into its iron brackets. Silas stood in the blackness, stunned. The air was instantly suffocating. He heard the first heavy drops of rain spatter against the roof, driven by the wind. "What in God's name are you doing, woman?" His voice was loud, echoing in the enclosed space. "Unlock that door." He heard her fumbling. A scrape of metal. A match flared, painfully bright. She lit a single lantern hanging from a peg, and the small, flickering flame threw huge, monstrous shadows against the walls. Her face was a mask of terror. "Mrs. Voss," he said, his voice low and dangerous now. He took a step toward her. "Open the door." "No, stay back." She'd grabbed the shotgun. She wasn't pointing it at him, not directly, but she held it across her body. A shield. Her knuckles were white. "I am not your enemy, ma'am," Silas said, holding his hands up, palms out. "But you will not lock me in here." "They're coming," she breathed, her eyes darting toward the door. The wind howled outside, and the rain began to pound the roof in earnest. A deafening drum roll. "I saw the dust from the North Road. It's them." Silas frowned. "Who's them?" "The debt collectors, my husband." She swallowed, her throat working. "He didn't just owe the bank. He borrowed from bad men. They've been here before. They said they'd be back to collect what he owed, one way or another." She looked at him, her fierce eyes now swimming with desperation. "They can't find you here. They can't know anyone is here." "So you locked me in?" he said, incredulous. "You think I'm going to hide in a stall while you—" "They will kill you," she said, cutting him off. Her voice was flat, certain. "They will kill you for being here. They will think you're with me, and then they will hurt me." The blunt, terrible honesty of it stopped him. He looked at her, the bruises on her arm, the shotgun, the palpable fear rolling off her. This wasn't a game. "They'll see my wagon, my mules," he said, his mind racing. "I know. I didn't think. It happened too fast." She was trembling now, the shotgun shaking slightly. "Please, just stay quiet. In the back. They'll see the wagon and think I hired a man for the day, that he's gone. They might just leave. But if they find you—" Silas let out a long breath. He was trapped by a storm and a terrified woman. He was angry, his muscles tight with the urge to fight or flee. But he looked at her face, white and strained in the lantern light, and the anger settled into something else, something heavy and familiar. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of men who knew the enemy was just on the other side of the breastworks. He nodded. Once, slowly. He backed away from her, deeper into the shadows of the cavernous barn. "All right, but you put that gun down. I'm not the one you're afraid of." She didn't lower the gun, but she didn't raise it either. She just stood by the door, listening. Silas retreated into an empty stall. The tension in the barn was so thick he could taste it. It was the metallic taste of fear. The only sounds were the roar of the wind and the relentless, driving rain on the roof. The lantern flickered, making the shadows jump and twist. He was close enough to smell the hay he'd just stacked. A clean, sweet scent. Under it was the smell of dust, and old manure, and something else. The faint, sharp scent of lye soap from her skin, mixed with the salt smell of her sweat. He leaned against the rough wood of the stall, his heart pounding a slow, heavy beat against his ribs. He felt the letter in his pocket, a stiff rectangle against his chest. He was a man who hauled hay, a man who kept to himself, and he was now a prisoner in a dark barn, hiding with a widow who was expecting men to come and hurt her, while a summer storm raged around them like the end of the world. Neither of them spoke. The silence inside the barn stretched, taut and breathless. They were only 20 feet apart, but they did not move toward each other. They just waited in the flickering dark, two strangers bound by a locked door and the violence of the coming night. The hours in the barn were a special kind of hell. Outside, the storm broke with the force of a cavalry charge. The wind shrieked like a dying animal, and the rain came down not in drops, but in solid, driving sheets that hammered the thin roof. The barn, which had seemed merely run down, now felt like a trap, the old timbers groaning under the assault. Every crack in the walls spat a fine, cold mist. Silas stayed in the shadows of the stall, leaning against the wood, his arms crossed. He was a patient man, but this was a test. He was angry, angry at being locked in, angry at the woman, angry at the sky. His mules, Jed and Samson, were still hitched to the wagon just outside the barn doors. He could hear them stamping and blowing, their fear a sharp counterpoint to the storm. Clara Voss stood by the door, a statue carved from fear. The shotgun never left her grasp. Her back was to him, her head tilted, listening. The single lantern hung on a peg, threw just enough light to make the darkness deeper, her shadow stretching long and twisted across the floor. "How long do you plan to keep me here?" Silas finally said, his voice a low rumble beneath the roar of the rain. She jumped, startled, as if she had forgotten he was there. She turned, her face pale in the gloom. "Until they're gone. And if they don't come, they'll come." Her certainty was absolute. "My mules are outside," he said, pushing off the wall. "They'll break their tethers in this wind, or worse." "They'll be fine. The high side of the barn gives them some cover. You seem to know a lot about it." "I know about hiding," she said, her voice flat. She turned back to the door. Silas walked a slow circuit of the barn's interior, staying to the dark perimeter. He passed his wagon, the hay he'd just stacked. He felt like a caged bear. "You saw dust. You said this rain would turn that road to mud inside of 5 minutes. No one is riding in this." "You don't know them," she whispered. "The storm won't stop them. Not if they think I have money." "The money from the hay." He said it was a statement, not a question. "You knew they were coming. You ordered the feed so you'd have coin." She said nothing. "And you were going to use me." He continued, his voice hardening. "What was the plan, Mrs. Voss? Have me here as some kind of guard, or just a distraction?" "No," she said, her voice shaking. She finally turned to face him fully. The shotgun was lowered, its barrel pointed at the dirt. I didn't think. I just knew I had to pay them. When I saw the dust, I panicked. I didn't want them to see you. That's all. I just didn't want them to hurt you, too." The two hung in the air, heavy and dark. Silas stopped his pacing. He looked at her. The fierce, guarded woman he'd met hours ago was gone, replaced by someone small and trembling. The anger in his chest didn't vanish, but it made room for something else, a weary, aching pity. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice softer. She moved away from the door, sinking down onto a low milking stool. She set the shotgun on the floor, but kept it within reach. "Men my husband owed. Martin, he liked to gamble. He liked to drink. He liked to make promises he couldn't keep." She picked at a splinter on the wooden stool. "My father owned the general store in Laramie. It was failing. Martin Voss he had land. He had prospects. My father said he paid my father's debts, and in return, my father gave him me." She said it so simply, like a transaction for livestock. "He wasn't a good man. Silas," she whispered, the first time she had used his name. He was heavy, in his hands, in his drinking. He liked to show everyone who was boss, and everyone was below him, especially me. She unconsciously touched her arm, the one where he had seen the bruise. "These men, they're not bankers. They're men who came with him, who he drank with. When he lost at cards, he'd promised them things, a percentage of the cattle, a piece of the land. When he ran out of things to promise, She stopped, her throat working. "He promised them you," Silas finished. She flinched, a sharp, violent tremor, but she nodded. "He died before they could collect. He went out in the blizzard last March to check the fence line. He said he'd been drinking. He didn't come back. I found him 2 days later, frozen solid, not a quarter mile from the house." The rain pounded the roof, a relentless drumbeat, as if trying to wash the words away. "The town," she continued, her voice hollow. The town whispers. They say I killed him. They say I locked him out and let him freeze. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Davies, she said I didn't cry at the funeral, that I looked relieved. She finally looked up at him, her eyes wide and haunted in the lantern light. Was I? I don't know. I just know I was quiet, for the first time in 3 years. The house was quiet, and now they'll say I'm a whore, too, for having you here. Silas stood there, the hay seller, the man with the unopened letter in his pocket. He had come to deliver feed and collect $20. He thought of the war, of the things men did to each other for land, for pride, for nothing at all. He had seen violence, but this felt different. It was colder, slower. It doesn't matter what they say, he said, his voice rough. It matters what's true. What is true? She asked, a bitter laugh escaping her. The truth is, I'm alone. My husband left me a pile of debt and a rotten reputation. And there are men coming who think they own me. Silas moved closer, sitting on a hay bale opposite her, the lantern light between them. The anger was gone. It had been washed out, replaced by a heavy empathy that settled in his bones. He knew what it was to be alone. He knew what it was to be haunted. I was at Cold Harbor, he said. She blinked, confused by the sudden turn. The war? The war. He nodded. 1864. I was just a boy, 17. We were ordered to make a charge. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. I fell. I don't remember being hit. I just remember the mud. It was red, and the sound, 1,000 men screaming, and then quiet. I woke up in the dark. The mud was cold. It was under me, and on top of me. I was buried in it, buried with the dead. Took me 2 days to crawl back to our lines, 2 days of listening to the wounded die. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from the hay hook. They left me for dead. Everyone did. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the letter. He held it, not looking at it. I was in a hospital in Washington for almost a year. My face, it was torn up. My leg was shattered. I wrote letters home, to my fiancée. Her name was Eliza. I wrote for months. No one wrote back. When I was finally well enough to travel, I went home to Missouri. She was married to another man, had been for 6 months. They told her I was dead. They'd had a funeral for me. Oh, Silas, Clara whispered. I didn't stay, he said, his voice flat. I didn't talk to her. I just turned around. I walked away. I let her think I was dead. Maybe it was easier. I came west. I've been running from that mud for 10 years. He looked at the letter. This is from her sister. Arrived in Cheyenne 3 weeks ago. I haven't opened it. He had told no one that story, not a single soul. He had carried it, just like he carried the letter, a piece of shrapnel working its way to the surface. He looked at Clara, and he saw his own isolation reflected in her terrified eyes. They were 2 ghosts, trapped in a barn, while the world tried to tear the roof from over their heads. Clara wept, not loudly. It was a silent, desperate collapse. The tears just ran down her face, cutting paths through the dust and grime. Her fear had finally cracked open, revealing the trembling, raw honesty beneath. He didn't move to comfort her. He just sat, a witness. He gave her the decency of his silence. They sat that way for hours, 2 strangers in the flickering light, while the storm screamed and tore at the world outside. And the confessions settled between them, heavy and real as the hay bales. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died first, followed by the slow tapering of the rain, until all that was left was the steady drip of water from the broken roof. The silence that fell was profound. In the new, gray light, the barn seemed smaller, colder. Silas rose, his joints stiff. He walked to the main doors. He listened. There was no sound but the tired sigh of the wind and the call of a distant meadowlark, testing the new day. They're not coming, he said. Clara, who had slumped, half asleep, against the stall, jerked awake. "What?" "It's dawn. They're not coming. The storm must have turned them back." He lifted the heavy bar from its brackets. The wood was slick with damp. He heaved the door open. A sliver of pale. Rain-washed light cut into the gloom. He stepped outside, breathing in the cold. Clean air. It smelled of wet earth and sage. His mules were exactly where he'd left them, soaked and miserable, but unharmed. Clara followed him out, shielding her eyes against the light. She looked exhausted. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary shame. "Mr. Granger, Silas, It's all right, ma'am," he said, patting Jed's neck. "No harm done." I locked you in," she said, her voice cracking. "I had no right. I'm sorry. I was so afraid." Silas turned to her. He should leave. He should hitch his mules and get on the road. This was her fight, her ghosts. He had his own. But he looked at her, standing there in her frayed dress, looking so small against the vast, empty land. And he thought of her words. I was quiet. For the first time. He thought of his own 10 years of quiet. He nodded toward the corner of her property. "That fence post, it's down. The one by the creek bed." She looked confused. "What?" "The fence. It's broken. Your cow's going to wander." He walked over to his wagon, pulled his gloves from his coat, and jammed his hat on his head. "I'll help you restack it. Then I'll be on my way." She didn't argue. She just watched him, a strange, unreadable expression on her face, as he grabbed a shovel and a mallet from the side of her broken-down shed. They worked for 2 hours. The sun came up, weak at first, then gaining strength, turning the wet land to steam. They didn't talk about the night. They talked about the land. He reset the post, tamping the wet earth down hard around its base. She held the wire while he stretched it taut and fixed it with new staples. It was simple, honest work. Their hands brushed. He'd hand her the mallet, and his fingers would graze her palm. She was strong, her hands calloused like his own. He watched her work, her face set in concentration, and he saw a flicker of the fierceness he'd first seen. But it was different now. It wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at the world. When they were finished, he stood back, wiping his hands. "That should hold it." "Thank you," she said. She was not looking at him, but at the fence. No one's helped me, not since Martin died." "Most folks are too busy with their own troubles," he said. She finally met his gaze. "You should eat before you go. I don't have much, some stew from yesterday." It was more than an offer of food. It was an invitation to stay, to cross the line from stranger to something else. He was hungry, and he was tired, and he found he was not yet ready to leave. "I'd be grateful." Her house was small, just 2 rooms, a main room with a fireplace, a table, and a stove, and a small sleeping room off the back. But it was clean, spotless. The floor was swept, the few pots scrubbed. It smelled of wood smoke and soap. She ladled stew into 2 bowls. It was thin, mostly potatoes and a little salt pork. But it was hot. They sat at the small table, the fireplace crackling beside them, warding off the last of the damp. They ate in silence for a while. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind that only comes after a shared ordeal. "What will you do?" he asked, setting his spoon down. "They'll be back." "I know." She stared into the fire. I'll sell the cow, the wagon. Maybe that will be enough." "It won't be," he said, not unkindly. "Men like that, it's never enough." "Then I don't know," she said, her voice small. "I don't know." He watched the firelight play on her face, on the strands of brown hair that had come loose. He saw the bruises on her arm, now visible as she'd rolled her sleeves up to work. He saw the shadows under her eyes, and he felt a pull, a strange, fierce draw to this broken, strong woman. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing her hand. "Clara!" She stopped breathing. She looked at his hand, then at his face. He leaned forward, slow, giving her every chance to turn away. She did not. When his lips met hers, it was not gentle. It was a spark landing on dry tinder. It was a sudden, violent recognition. All the loneliness, the fear, the years of solitude and grief erupted. It was a kiss of pure, desperate hunger. She made a sound in her throat, a small, broken gasp, and her hands came up, not to push him away, but to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. This was not a courtship. This was survival. He was on his feet, pulling her up with him. He backed her against the rough sod wall, his mouth devouring hers. His hands were in her hair, pulling the pins loose, letting it fall. It was rough and needy and true. He could feel her trembling, or maybe he was the one trembling. Tears were on her face, but they were tears of release, not sorrow. He kissed her throat, her collarbone, his beard scraping her skin. He fumbled with the buttons of her dress, his hands thick and clumsy. Then he stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard. He looked at her. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted, her face awash with a raw, desperate need. He saw the bruises again. He thought of Martin Voss, the heavy-handed husband. Silas put his hands on her shoulders, holding her steady. "Clara, is this what you want?" Her eyes snapped open. They were clear and fierce and aching. She looked at him, the man who had seen her at her most terrified, who had shared his own broken past, who had mended her fence. She put her trembling hands on his face, her thumbs tracing the lines by his eyes. "Don't leave me empty again," she whispered. It was not a plea. It was a demand. It broke the last of his restraint. He kissed her again, but it was different this time. He lifted her into his arms, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her the few steps into the small bedroom. He laid her on the simple rope bed, the quilt rough beneath her. The light in the room was dim, the storm long gone. He moved over her, and their coming together was not just desire. It was a quiet, desperate understanding. It was two survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood. It was the first honest thing either of them had felt in years. Later, they lay in the quiet. The fire in the next room had burned low. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling beams. She was curled against his side, her breathing slow and even. She was asleep. He felt quiet. The words she had used, the anger, the running, the ghosts of Cold Harbor and the memory of Eliza, they were not gone, but they were, for the first time, silent. He looked at the woman sleeping beside him, her face soft in the twilight, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he would not be leaving in the morning. Silas woke to the gray light of morning. For a long moment, he did not know where he was. The ceiling was too low. The air filled with the scent of wood smoke and the faint, clean smell of lye soap and the woman beside him. Then the night before returned to him. The storm, the confession, the desperate, aching release. Clara was still asleep, turned away from him, a tangle of brown hair on the pillow. The quilt was pulled up to her shoulder. He looked at the line of her back, the vulnerability of her sleep. He felt a sharp, unfamiliar urge to protect her, followed immediately by a stronger, older urge to flee. This was not his life. This was not his trouble. His life was the road, the mules, the simple transactions of hay and coin. He slid from the bed, his bare feet hitting the cold dirt floor. He moved quietly, pulling on his trousers and shirt, his boots heavy in his hand. He carried them into the main room, set them by the door, and scrubbed his face in the metal basin. The water was icy, a welcome shock. Outside, the air was cold and clean. The world looked scoured, the sky a pale, fragile blue. His mules, Jed and Samson, blew softly as he approached, their coats still damp. He ran his hands over them, checking their legs. They were fine, just tired and irritable. He began hitching them to the wagon. His hands moved with practiced, familiar motions. This was his world. The creak of leather, the jingle of harness, the solid weight of the wagon tongue. He finished the task and stood for a moment, looking at the road that led away from her ranch. He should be on it. He should be miles away before she even woke. "You're leaving." He turned. She was standing on the small porch, wrapped in a threadbare wool blanket. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders, and her face was pale. She looked younger than he'd thought, and impossibly tired. He finished buckling the last strap. "Storm's passed. I've got a load to pick up in South Pass." It was a lie, but it was an easy one. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. She looked at the fence post he had mended, then at the listing barn. "You helped me? Thank you." He nodded, turning back to the wagon. He put his foot on the wheel, spoke, ready to climb up. "Stay," she said. His foot froze. He kept his back to her. "Ma'am?" "Stay," she said again, her voice stronger this time, though it trembled. Just for one more day. I don't know what to do. About the men, about the ranch. You said it yourself. They'll be back. I can't think straight. I need just one day to make a plan." He slowly took his foot off the wheel. He turned to face her. She was asking for his time, but he knew she was asking for more. She was asking for the safety she'd felt in his arms. He thought of the letter in his pocket. He thought of himself walking away from Eliza's house in Missouri, his back straight, his heart a cold stone. He had been running ever since. He looked at Clara, at her fierce, frightened eyes. He saw the bruises on her skin, but he also saw the strength that had kept her here, alone, for months. "One day," he said, his voice rough, "we'll go to town, see if there's a lawyer who can make sense of this." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it almost buckled her knees. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and went back inside the house. 20 miles east, in the town of Sweetwater Crossing, the gossip was already taking root. Jebediah Fry, the young clerk at the Emporium, was recounting a story to a pair of miners. "I tell you, I saw him plain as day," Jeb said, leaning on the counter. "Silas Granger, the hay man, the big one who never talks, drove that wagon of his right past the turnoff, headed straight for the Voss place. That was 2 days ago, and he ain't come back." Amos Pritchett, an old man whittling on a bench by the stove, spat a stream of tobacco juice into a cuspidor. "Heifers in heat, is she?" he cackled. "Didn't waste much time finding a new bull after freezing old Martin." "That ain't proven, Amos," Jeb said, though he looked pleased by the rumor. "Proven enough," Amos said. "Woman like that, left alone? She's either trouble or finds it. Now she's got a big fella hole up with her. Sheriff ought to know. Sheriff." Sheriff Brody looked up from his desk in the office across the street. He heard the old man shouting and sighed, pushing his hat back. He'd been meaning to ride out to the Voss place. Now, it seemed, he had another reason. Back at the ranch, the fragile peace of the morning was shattered. Silas had unhitched the mules, letting them graze on the sparse, wet grass. He was inspecting the barn, seeing what it would take to fix the lean. He was no carpenter, but he understood leverage. He ran his hand over the main door, the one she had barred against him, and his fingers brushed paper. He looked closer. It was a piece of cheap brown paper, nailed to the thick planking. It hadn't been nailed with a nail. It was held fast by a long, thin skinning knife, plunged deep into the wood. He ripped the knife from the plank. It was a vicious, ugly tool. He tore the paper free and read the crude, penciled words. "You'll pay what he owed, one way or another." A cold, dark rage, the kind he hadn't felt since the war, flooded his chest. It was the mud, it was the screaming, it was the pure, senseless cruelty of men. He stormed from the barn. The paper crumpled in one fist, the knife in the other. He burst into the small house without knocking.
"Who sent this?"
Clara was by the stove. She dropped a pot with a clatter. She stared at the knife in his hand, then at his face. His eyes were not the eyes of the man who had held her in the night. They were the eyes of a killer.
What is it?"
she stammered, backing away. He slammed the knife down on the table. It quivered, the point sticking in the wood. He threw the crumpled paper at her. "This on the barn door. Who sent it? Clara?" She shrank from his anger, but she picked up the paper. She unfolded it, her hands shaking. As she read the words, all the color drained from her face. She sank onto the bench, her legs giving way. "Oh, God, they were here. They were here."
"Who?"
he demanded, his voice a low growl.
"I don't know,"
she cried, her voice breaking.
"I told you, the men he owed. I don't know their names. They came with him. They're just them."
Her terror was genuine. It cut through his rage, leaving him feeling cold and heavy. This wasn't a fight he could win with his fists. This was something rotten, something that had been festering long before he arrived. He pulled the knife from the table and studied it. "This is a threat, a promise. We're going to town now. Not just for a lawyer. We're finding out who this belongs to." He hitched the mules again. He told Clara to bring any papers Martin had left. She found a small tin box containing a few receipts, a deed to the land, and a handful of IOUs, all signed with Martin's sprawling, drunken signature. They sat side by side on the wagon bench. The sun was higher now, warm, but Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. He drove the mules hard, his jaw set. The road was muddy in patches, forcing them to slow. The land was wide and empty, beautiful in its desolation. After an hour of tense, jarring silence, Silas pulled the wagon off the rutted track.
"What are you doing?"
Clara asked, her voice tight. "Watering the mules," he said. He guided them down a gentle slope to the bank of a shallow, clear-flowing river lined with cottonwoods. The water glittered in the sun. He unhitched the mules and let them drink. He stood by the wagon, the silence stretching. Clara sat on the bench, her hands knotted in her lap. "Get down," he said.
"Why?"
"Just get down! Clara!" Warily, she climbed down from the wagon. He walked to the river's edge, knelt, and splashed the cold water onto his face. It felt good. It felt real. He looked at her, standing stiffly on the bank. "Come on," he said. "The water's clear." She shook her head. "We don't have time." "We'll make time," he said. He took off his boots and socks and waded into the river. The water was only calf deep, the rocks smooth under his feet. "It'll wash the dust off." She watched him, her expression torn. He looked different, younger, less burdened. He bent down and splashed water at her, the drops glittering as they hit her dress. She gasped, startled. "Silas!" "It's just water," he said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. She looked at the running water, then at his outstretched hand. Slowly, as if in a dream, she untied her own worn boots and slipped them off. She hiked her skirts up and stepped into the river. The cold was a sharp, sudden shock. She winced, but then she laughed. It was a small, rusty sound, as if the parts of her that made laughter had forgotten how. "It's freezing." "Better than freezing in a barn," he said. She splashed him back, a small, tentative gesture. They stood there for a long minute in the shallow, sunlit water. The world felt distant, the threats, the debts. They were on the bank, with their boots. Here, there was just the sun on their skin, the sound of the river, and the feeling of being clean. She reached out and touched his arm, the one he'd scraped in the ambush, though he didn't know it yet. "When you're here," she said, her voice quiet,
I feel safe. I haven't felt safe in 3 years.
He looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. He looked at her face, at the way the sun caught the few threads of gold in her brown hair. He thought of her locking him in the barn, of her confession, of her standing up to him. "You're braver than any man I knew in battle, Clara," he said, and he meant it. The tenderness of the moment was a fragile, beautiful thing. It stayed with them as they dried their feet, hitched the mules, and continued on to the town of Casper, a larger settlement with a real lawyer's office. The lawyer's name was Elias Harlan. He was a small, weary man with spectacles and a waistcoat stained with ink. He looked at Clara and Silas, his gaze lingering on Silas's size. Then, on the way, Clara stayed close to him. He listened. He nodded. He read the IOUs. His lips pursed. He looked at the deed. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. "The deed is in your name, Mrs. Voss," he said. "That is good. Martin signed it over to you. A wedding gift. It says—" "But the debts?" Clara asked. "The debts," Harlan sighed. "These are problematic. They are gambling debts, mostly unenforceable in a proper court. However, the man they're owed to, he doesn't use a proper court." "Who is he?" Silas asked, his voice flat. He laid the skinning knife on the lawyer's desk. "We found this on her barn door this morning." Harlan looked at the knife, his weariness turning to something like fear. He pushed his spectacles up his nose. Hollis Briggs. The name meant nothing to Silas, but he saw Clara flinch. "Briggs," Harlan continued, his voice low, "owns the Double H Ranch north of here. Biggest operation in the county. He's persuasive. He holds the bank's mortgage. He has Sheriff Brody on his payroll. He wants land, and he has a method for getting it." "What method?" Silas asked. "He finds ranchers who are weak, men like your husband. He gets them into debt, deep. Then he waits. If the man can't pay, he takes the land, or if the man dies, he pressures the widow." "He's done this before," Clara whispered. Harlan nodded grimly. "Twice, that I know of. The widow Miller, over on the Sweetwater. She tried to fight him. Her barn burned down, lost her stock, had to sell to the bank for pennies. Briggs bought it a week later, and the widow Jensen, she just vanished. Her land is part of the Double H grazing range now." A cold, heavy silence filled the small office. The law was no help. The law was part of the problem. "What can we do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Honestly, Mrs. Voss," Harlan said, sliding the knife back across the desk. "Sell to him. Take whatever he offers. Or pack your wagon and ride out. Ride out of this county and don't look back." The ride back to the ranch was silent. The sun was setting, painting the high clouds in streaks of orange and blood red. The hope they had found at the river was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of Harlan's words. They were alone. They were 3 miles from the ranch, the light failing fast when it happened. A rider burst from a thicket of cottonwoods by the dry creek bed. His face was covered by a dark bandana. He was on them before Silas could even reach for the rifle he kept under the seat. The man didn't shoot. He veered his horse straight at the mules, screaming, whipping at their heads with a coiled rope. Jed and Samson panicked. They reared, braying in terror, and bolted, pulling the wagon off the road. "Hold on!" Silas roared. He fought the reins, his muscles straining as the wagon careened over the rough ground, smashing through sagebrush. He shoved Clara hard, pushing her down to the floorboards. "Stay down!" The wagon wheel hit a rock, sending the wagon airborne for a terrifying second. It slammed back to earth, the impact jarring Silas so hard his teeth clicked. He was scraped against the wagon side, a long, fiery pain ripping up his arm. The masked rider was beside them now, his horse galloping flat out. He leaned over, trying to grab the mule's bridles. Silas saw his chance. He let the reins go slack in one hand and grabbed his long, heavy mule whip from its holder. With a roar that came from his gut, Silas lashed out. The whip cracked like a gunshot, the leather popper catching the rider's horse square across the eyes. The horse screamed, a terrible sound, and reared violently. Spinning in a circle, the rider, caught by surprise, was nearly unseated. He cursed, sawing at the reins, fighting to control his panicked mount. It was the only chance Silas needed. He grabbed his own reins and cracked the whip over his mule's backs. Ha! Ha! The mules, already running, found another gear. They plunged forward, the wagon rattling and groaning, back toward the road. Silas didn't look back. He didn't slow until the ranch was in sight, the mules lathered and trembling. He pulled them to a halt in the yard, his entire body shaking with adrenaline. He jumped down and helped Clara up. She was pale, her knuckles white from gripping the seat, but she was unharmed.
"Are you all right?"
she whispered. "He's gone," Silas said, his voice rough. He looked at the long, bleeding scrape on his forearm. He looked at his shaking hands. That night, the house felt even smaller, the silence heavier. He barred the door. He loaded the shotgun and leaned it by the fireplace. He sat at the table, cleaning the scrape on his arm with whiskey and a rag. Clara was standing by her bed, stuffing a few clothes into a canvas satchel. Her back was to him. "You have to go," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Silas wrapped the rag around his arm. "No, I'm not asking." She turned to face him. The fear was back, but it was a new fear. It was not for herself. It was for him. "He tried to kill us, Silas. He tried to wreck the wagon. This isn't your fight. It's mine. It's Martin's filth, and I'm the one who has to clean it up. I won't have your death on my hands." She picked up the satchel. "I want you to go. Tonight, take your wagon and go. Please." He stood up slowly. He walked over to her, his shadow swallowing her in the dim firelight. He was tired of running, tired of being afraid. He took the satchel from her unresisting hands and tossed it onto the bed. He stood in front of her, so close he could feel the heat from her body. He put his hands on her shoulders. "I ain't running from you," he said, his voice low and final. "I ran once, from a woman who needed me. Even if I didn't know it at the time, I've been running for 10 years. I'm done running." He touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know she'd shed. "I'm not leaving you. Never again." His decision to stay hung in the air of the small cabin, a silent, binding thing. The argument of the night before had not ended in anger, but in a quiet, grim acceptance. He had not run, now. The land was his problem, too. The next morning, Silas was up before the sun, his mind working not as a hay seller, but as a soldier. He walked the perimeter of the ranch, his eyes scanning, assessing. He was not just looking at a property. He was looking at a battlefield. He saw the shallow creek bed that offered cover for an approach. He saw the wide, open stretch of land to the west that left a man exposed. He saw the listing barn, a structure that could be a fortress or a trap. Clara watched him from the porch, a mug of weak, bitter coffee held in both hands. She watched him check the hinges on the sod house door, saw him test the strength of the window frames. He was a man possessed by a new, cold purpose. He was preparing for a siege. She was torn. A part of her, the part that had survived Martin, screamed at her to run, to take this man's kindness as a gift and flee before he was hurt, before his blood was added to the debt this land demanded. But another part, a small, new thing that had started to grow in the last 2 days, felt a flicker of defiant hope. He was not just a big man. He was a smart one. He moved with an economy of motion, a surety that spoke of a deep, hard-won knowledge. He was not running, and if he was not running, maybe she did not have to, either. That evening, the work turned inward, the most glaring weakness. the one that shamed the property, was the barn. The storm had ripped more shingles from its roof, leaving the loft where he'd stacked the hay exposed to the sky. "We fixed this," he said, not asking. "We can't be trapped in a place that's already half fallen." The work was slow. It was a clear, cool evening, the sky a deep bruised purple that faded to apricot at the horizon. They worked on the roof, a perilous, sloped world of split wood and missing nails. He, with his long reach and steady strength, moved along the ridgepole, while she, lighter and quicker, passed him shingles and hammers from the bucket he'd hauled up. It was an intimacy of a different kind. It was built of shared labor, of quiet understanding. Their hands touched passing a tool, his calloused fingers brushing her scraped knuckles. "Careful," he'd murmur, as she navigated a weak spot. "I've got you," she'd say, as she braced a new plank for him to nail. The sun went down, leaving them in a deep twilight. They sat on the peak of the roof, exhausted, the air sharp with the smell of cut pine and the distant, clean scent of the high desert. They had fixed a patch maybe 10 feet square. It was not much, but it was solid. "It's the first time," she said, her voice quiet in the dusk, "that something's been built here, not just left to rot." He said nothing, just looked out at the vast, darkening land. It was beautiful, in its own hard way. Later, inside, they sat by the fire. The tension of the ambush was gone, replaced by the simple, heavy tiredness of a day's hard work. He had taken off his shirt to clean the scrape on his arm, which was an angry red. Clara tore a strip from one of her few clean rags and soaked it in the last of the whiskey. She knelt before him as he sat on the bench, and she began to clean the wound. Her touch was gentle, careful. He watched her head, bent to her task, the firelight catching the brown of her hair. He reached into his own shirt pocket, the one hanging on a peg, and his fingers found the letter. He pulled it out. It was rumpled, stained with his sweat. He held it, looking at the unfamiliar handwriting. "I know what it's like," she said, not looking up from his arm. "To be haunted by a ghost." He looked at her, surprised. "My Martin," she said, her voice flat. "He's dead, but he's not gone. He's in the debts. He's in that knife. He's in the way the town looks at me." She finished tying the bandage. "Your ghost. At least she loved you once." He held the letter out to her. "I can't open it." She looked at the letter, then at his face. His eyes were full of a pain so old it had become a part of him. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the letter. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. She unfolded the single sheet of paper. The handwriting was neat, feminine. She began to read, her voice soft in the quiet room, the crackle of the fire punctuation to the words. "Mr. Granger," she read, "I write to you not for my sister, Eliza, but for myself. My name is Mary, and I was her younger sister. I am the one who told her you were dead. It was a lie." Silas went rigid. His hands gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. Clara's voice faltered, but she continued. "A letter came from the War Department. It said you were missing, presumed killed in action at Cold Harbor. We all believed it. We mourned you. But then, 6 months later, a letter came from you, from a hospital. I got it from the post. Eliza she was already promised to Mr. Harris. He was a kind man. Silas, he was there, and you were gone." Clara's own tears began to well, blurring the words. "I burned your letter. I told her it was just a final notice from the army. I wanted her to be happy. I was so young. I thought I was protecting her. She married him. She was a good wife. But she was never happy. She looked for you in every crowd. For years. She died 2 winters ago. A fever. It took her in 3 days. Her last word. It was your name." The letter fell from Clara's hand. She was weeping openly now. For him, for the woman named Eliza, for the terrible, stupid cruelty of it all. Silas did not move. He was a statue of iron. The ghost he had been running from for 10 years was not a woman who had betrayed him. She was a woman who had waited for him, and he had let her down. He had walked away. Clara moved, kneeling in front of him, putting her hands on his knees.
Silas, she didn't know. You didn't run from her. You were stolen from her.
He looked at her, his eyes hollow.
I let her go.
You were a boy, left for dead, Clara said, her voice fierce. You were broken and she was gone. You did what you had to, just like me. He looked at her, truly saw her. Her face, streaked with tears and soot, was the strongest, bravest thing he had ever seen. He put his bandaged arm up, his hand cupping her jaw. He pulled her to him, and his kiss was not the desperate hunger of the first time. It was a kiss of deep, profound, and aching sorrow. It was a kiss that said, I see your pain. Here is mine. That night, they did not go to the small bed in the house. The house was full of ghosts. He led her by the hand to the barn. He climbed the ladder to the loft, to the clean, sweet-smelling hay he had stacked himself. He pulled her up. The roof they had mended was a dark patch against the stars, visible through the other holes. The moon was a silver crescent, spilling just enough light to see her face. He undressed her slowly, his hands worshipping. He unbuttoned her dress, his fingers tracing the bruises on her arms, the old, faded scars on her back. He kissed them, as if his lips could heal the memory. She, in turn, unlaced his boots, pulled the rough shirt over his head. She touched the long, puckered scar on his leg from the mini-ball, the smaller scars on his chest. When they came together, it was slow. It was a discovery. It was all eye contact and whispered names. It was a man and a woman, finally, truly, seeing each other in the dark. He moved with a reverence, a care that was so foreign to her. She did not know what to do with it. He was not taking, he was giving. After, as she lay curled against his chest, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm under her ear, Clara began to cry. It was not the silent, desperate weeping of the storm. It was a deep, body-racking sob, a release of years of poison.
Clara, what? Did I hurt you?
Silas asked, his voice thick with alarm, rising up on one elbow. She shook her head, burying her face in his shoulder.
No,
she choked out.
No, it's just, no one ever touched me like I mattered before.
He said nothing. He just held her, stroking her hair, his own eyes burning. He held her until her sobs quieted, until her breathing evened out, and they fell asleep. Two broken pieces finally fitted together, safe in the ruins of the barn. The sun was high and hot the next day when they came. Silas was in the corral, resetting the gate. When he heard them, the sound of shod horses, too many of them, moving too fast, he looked north, a cloud of dust, 4 riders. "Clara!" he yelled, his voice a sharp command. He ran for the house, grabbing the rifle he'd left leaning against the wall. "Inside! Get in the house and bar the door! Do not come out, no matter what you hear!" She met him at the door, her face white. "Silas, no, you can't! Do it! Clara, now!" His voice was the voice of a man who had seen battle. She flinched, then obeyed, scrambling inside. He heard the heavy thud of the bar dropping. Silas stepped away from the house, into the middle of the yard. He chambered around, the shuck-chick of the rifle a sharp, ugly sound in the stillness. He stood alone, his feet planted, the rifle held easy across his chest. The 4 riders clattered into the yard, pulling their horses to a rough, circling halt. They were hard men. Their dusters were worn, their hats stained. Each man had a pistol on his hip and a rifle in a saddle scabbard. They looked at the mended fence, the patched barn roof, and then at Silas. One man, who seemed to be the leader, spat a stream of tobacco. He was older, with a graying beard and cold, dead eyes. "Well, look what we have here. You must be the new help." "State your business," Silas said. His voice was calm, low. The man chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "My business is with the widow, not with you, farmhand. Tell her to come on out." "The widow's not receiving visitors. You're talking to me." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked Silas up and down, taking in his size, the rifle, the way he stood. He saw this was not some drifting ranch hand. "You're that hay seller, Granger. Heard you was hole up here. You're deep in something that ain't your concern." "Boy." "This land belongs to Mrs. Voss." Silas said, "You're trespassing." "This land," the man said, leaning forward on his pommel, "belongs to Hollis Briggs, or it will, in 3 days. Martin Voss owed a debt. That debt is past due. We're here to deliver the warning. Mr. Briggs is a patient man, but his patience has run out. Her husband's debts died with him." Silas said, "Not this one." The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "This one's written on the land. 3 days. Granger, tell the little widow to pack her things, or we'll be back to pack them for her, and we won't be as polite." He deliberately looked at the house, a long, suggestive look. "You deliver your message?" Silas asked, his voice like ice. The man's grin faded. "We delivered it." "Then get off this land." The tension crackled. It was 4 guns to 1. The leader stared at Silas, who did not blink. He saw the cold, empty calm in Silas's eyes and knew this man would shoot, and he would not miss. "Cocky for a dead man," the leader sneered. He reined his horse around. 3 days. He and his men wheeled their horses and galloped out of the yard, leaving a cloud of dust and the heavy, ringing silence of their threat. Silas did not lower the rifle until they were out of sight. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, his hands shaking slightly. He uncocked the rifle and turned to the house. He lifted the bar and went inside. Clara was huddled in the corner, by the cold fireplace, her knees drawn to her chest. She was shaking so badly her teeth chattered. "They're gone," he said, his voice gentle. She didn't uncurl. She just rocked, a low keen coming from her throat. 3 days. 3 days. Oh, God, oh, God. "Clara," he said, kneeling in front of her. We'll go. We'll go to the federal agent. "You don't understand," she shrieked, her control finally snapping. She lunged at him, her fists beating against his chest. "You don't understand. We can't. He'll find us. He'll kill us. He'll... He caught her wrists, holding her. "Clara, stop! It's me!" She collapsed against him, her body racked with a new, deeper terror. I killed him. Silas." The words were so quiet he almost didn't hear them. "What?" "Martin," she sobbed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I killed him. The town, the whispers, they're true. I killed him." Silas went very still. He kept his arms around her, but his body was rigid. He came home," she gasped, the words tumbling out. Poison finally lanced. "That night of the blizzard. He'd been gone for 2 days, drinking with Briggs. He said he'd made a deal. He was going to sell me to Briggs. In exchange for the debt, he said a wife was property. Same as a cow." She was shaking violently, her memories overwhelming her. I said no. I tried to run. He grabbed me. He hit me. He broke my ribs. I could feel them snap. He laughed. He said he'd break me in, so Briggs wouldn't have to. He threw me on the floor. He was going to... "Clara, stop," Silas said, his voice thick. "No!" she screamed. "You have to know. I grabbed the fireplace poker. He was on top of me. I hit him. I kept hitting him until he stopped."
until he was still, and then I was so cold. He was so heavy. I pushed him out. I pushed him out the door into the snow, and I locked it. I let him freeze. I am a murderer.
She finished, her confession hanging in the small room, a terrible, final thing. She was empty. She waited for him to pull away. She waited for the disgust, for the horror. She waited for him to leave. Silas said nothing for a long time. He just held her, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He heard her words. He pictured the scene. He felt the cold, the terror, the final, desperate act. He breathed in the smell of her hair, felt the last of her shudders. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and rough and absolutely certain. "You did what you had to," he said. He pulled her back, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were clear. "That don't make you broken. That makes you free." Her confession, a poisoned blade drawn, did not kill the fragile thing between them. It did the opposite. It bled the last of the infection. He had held her until the shaking stopped, his words a balm on the raw wound of her past. "That makes you free." He had said it, and in saying it, he had bound himself to her, a chain forged not of duty, but of shared, brutal understanding. They had only 2 days. The threat of 3 days was a death knell. Hollis Briggs was not a man who bluffed. "The lawyer," Silas said, his voice rough in the pre-dawn cold of the cabin. "Harlan, he said Briggs has the local sheriff. We can't find help in Sweetwater or Casper." "Then where?" Clara was packing, her movement swift, economical. She was not packing to flee, she was packing to fight. She wrapped hardtack, a side of bacon, and a small bag of coffee. "There's a federal land agent in the next county," Silas said, checking his rifle. Then her shotgun. "Johnson County. It's a hard ride, over a day, but he's federal. He's not on Briggs' payroll." "Then we ride," she said. They did not take the wagon. It was too slow, too visible. He saddled his 2 mules, Jed and Samson. They were steady, built for endurance, better than horses in the high, rocky country. He rode Jed, she, Samson. They carried the food, 2 canteens of water, their rifles, and the tin box of Martin's papers. They left the ranch under the cover of a low, gray mist, skirting the main road, heading north into the unforgiving hills. They rode for hours, in silence, following game trails and dry washes. The land was empty, but it felt watched. Every hawk circling overhead seemed like a spy. Every crack of a branch in the distance made them jump. By nightfall, they were deep in the broken country, miles from any settlement. The mules were exhausted. A cold, sharp wind began to blow, carrying the first hints of an early autumn. Silas spotted it from a ridge. A small, dark shape huddled in a grove of skeletal pines, an old line cabin, abandoned by shepherds or trappers years ago. It was a single room, the door hanging off one leather hinge, the roof half collapsed, but it was shelter. Silas built a small, smokeless fire in the crumbling stone fireplace. Clara spread their blankets on the packed earth floor. They ate the hardtack and bacon, drinking water from the canteen. The wind moaned through the gaps in the log walls, but inside, with the small fire, it was almost peaceful. Clara sat with her back against the wall, her knees drawn up.
"Do you think he'll listen, the agent?"
"He has to," Silas said, staring into the low flames. "Harlan told us about the other widows, Miller and Jensen. It's a pattern. That's not just debt collection. That's a crime. Coercion, extortion." She was quiet for a long time. The firelight softened the harsh lines of her face, put a warm glow in her eyes. "This place, this valley, it's beautiful. I always hated that ranch. It was his. It smelled like him, like stale whiskey and anger." She looked at Silas. "I used to dream.
When I was a girl, before my father, I dreamed of a place with water, a green valley with just grass and a small house, a clean one." Silas looked at her, at this woman who had survived a monster and was now hunted by another. He saw the girl she had been, just under the surface of the hard, wary woman. "Maybe after this," she whispered, her voice so low he barely heard it. If we get away, we could find a place like that." She was talking about a future. It was a word neither of them had dared to use. It was a fragile, terrifying thing. Cattle, grass, a clean house, maybe even children. The thought was a sharp, sudden ache in his chest. He reached over, his hand covering hers where it rested on her knee. His thumb stroked her skin. "I'd build it for you, Clara," he said, his voice thick. "If you wanted, I'd build you that house." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. She didn't say anything. She just held on, and they sat in the abandoned cabin, two fugitives daring to dream of a home. They reached Johnson County the next afternoon, only to find the land agent was gone, ridden north to the army post, not expected back for a week. The trip was for nothing. The 2 days were wasted. The ride back was a silent, desperate race against the sun. They arrived at the ridge overlooking her ranch just as dusk was settling on the 3rd day, the day the warning expired. And they saw the smoke. It was not the thin gray smoke of a chimney. It was a thick, oily black plume rising from the west field. "No," Clara breathed, digging her heels into Samson's sides, plunging down the slope. "Clara, wait!" Silas yelled. But she was gone, and he was right behind her. They burst into the ranch yard. The main house was untouched, but the west field, her only decent pasture, was on fire. And the barn was next. 4 men were there, the same 4 from the other day. They were carrying torches. One was in the act of throwing his torch onto the pile of hay Silas had stacked in the loft. "Hey, get away from there!" Silas roared, leaping from the mule before it even stopped. He ran at the man, his rifle still on his back. He had no time. He met the man in a full-on charge, his shoulder hitting the man's chest like a battering ram. The man grunted, flying backward, the torch sailing into the dirt. Silas turned, his fists raised, just as another man brought a shovel down, hard, across his back. Silas collapsed, the air driven from his lungs, a starburst of white-hot pain exploding behind his eyes. He tried to get up, to crawl for his rifle, but a boot slammed into his ribs. Then another. He curled into a ball, the world reduced to a universe of pain, the smell of dust, and the sound of men laughing. "Had enough. Hey, man," the leader sneered, standing over him. "Told you to stay out of it." He raised the heavy heel of his boot, aiming for Silas's head. The shot was so loud it deafened them. It was not a rifle crack. It was the deep, full-throated boom of a shotgun. The leader stopped, his boot frozen in the air. He looked down, confused, at his own arm. His duster was suddenly shockingly red. He hadn't been hit. The man beside him, the one with the shovel, had... The man with the shovel grabbed his shoulder, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at his own blood, then at Clara. She was standing 20 feet away, the shotgun still pressed to her shoulder, smoke wisping from the barrel. Her face was a mask of cold, white rage. She had not aimed to kill, she had aimed to stop. The situation spiraled. The man she'd shot screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and fury. "She shot me! The crazy bitch shot me!" "Get her!" the leader yelled. Clara fumbled to break the shotgun, to reload, but she was shaking, her hands slick with sweat. One of the men ran at her. Silas roared. He lunged from the ground, ignoring the fire in his back and ribs, and tackled the man at the knees. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The sound of another horse, galloping hard.
cut through the chaos. "In the name of the law, stand down!" Sheriff Brody. He skidded his horse to a halt in the yard, his pistol drawn. He was not alone. Behind him were 3 more men, townsmen, including Amos Pritchett, the old man from the store, holding a rifle. Briggs' men immediately threw their hands up. "Sheriff, thank God. This crazy woman, she just shot Tom. We came to collect a debt, peaceful-like, and she tried to kill us." Brody looked at the scene, the burning field, the bleeding man, Silas, bruised and battered, climbing to his feet, and Clara, standing frozen. The shotgun dropped at her feet. "Clara Voss," Brody said, his voice cold and official. "I'm arresting you for the attempted murder of Tom Grimes." "What?" Silas spat, moving to stand in front of her. "He's lying. They were burning her field. They beat me. She fired in defense." "I see a man shot. Granger," Brody said, his pistol aimed at Silas's chest. "And I see the woman who shot him. Amos Jebb. Keep your rifles on him. He looks like trouble, too." She confessed," Amos Pritchett cackled, his rifle wavering. "Jebb here heard her, screaming at Granger. Said she killed Martin, murdered him in the snow. We heard it plain as day." Clara's face went blank with a new, colder terror. "Is that so?" Brody said, a slow, ugly smile spreading on his face. He looked at Clara. "Looks like we've got a lot to talk about. Ma'am, you'll be coming with me." They took her, Silas, his ribs screaming, his head spinning, could only watch as they put her on a horse and led her away. A prisoner. The burning field lit the yard in a hellish, flickering red light. Silas knew he had no time. He knew Brody. He knew Briggs. This would not be a trial. It would be a hanging. He ignored the pain. He ran to his mule, grabbed the tin box of papers, and mounted. He did not ride after the sheriff. He turned Jed back toward Casper, a 40-mile ride. He rode through the night, the pain in his back a dull, throbbing counterpoint to the panic in his heart. He got to Casper as the sun was rising, his mule lathered, he himself half conscious. He didn't go to the sheriff's office. He went to the lawyer's. He pounded on Harlan's door until the small, sleepy man opened it. "Granger, what in God's name—" "They've got her," Silas choked out, stumbling inside. "They arrested her, for the shooting, and for Martin. They're going to hang her." Harlan was suddenly terrifyingly awake. "Brody?" "Yes, and he brought townsfolk. They're saying she's a killer." Harlan ran a hand through his thin hair. "The circuit judge, Judge Allister. He's in town. He's leaving for Cheyenne this morning. It's our only chance." They ran, Silas limping, his ribs on fire, to the hotel. They caught Judge Allister as he was paying his bill. He was a tall, imposing man with a long white beard and eyes that had seen too much. "Judge," Harlan said, breathless. "A moment. It is a matter of life and death." The judge listened. He listened to Harlan's story of the widows, of Briggs's pattern of extortion. He listened to Silas's frantic, pained account of the attack, the fire, the defensive shot. The judge was silent for a full minute. "They're holding her in Sweetwater." "Yes, sir, but it's not a jail. It's Brody's office, and Briggs runs that town. Get this man a fresh horse." The judge ordered the hotel clerk. "And fetch my bag. It seems I am not going to Cheyenne today. We will have a court. Mr. Harlan, we will have it now." The trial, if it could be called that, was held in the Sweetwater Emporium. The judge had commandeered it. He sat on a high stool behind the counter, his face grim. The room was packed. The entire town pressed in, their faces a mix of fear and greedy curiosity. Hollis Briggs himself stood in the back, his arms crossed, watching. Clara sat on a crate, her hands tied. She was pale, but she was not crying. She looked empty. Sheriff Brody presented his case first. "She's a menace. Judge shot Tom Grimes in the arm, unprovoked, and we have witnesses. Amos Pritchett, who heard her confess to murdering her own husband. Martin Voss left him to freeze, and she's been living in sin with this drifter. The room erupted in whispers. Whore, killer, righteous. Judge Allister slammed his gavel. Silence, or I will clear this room and try this case in the street. He looked at Harlan. Your witness. Harlan, small and nervous but finding his courage, spoke. He told the judge about the Miller widow, about the Jensen widow. He presented the skinning knife. He showed the IOUs. He built a case, brick by brick, of Hollis Briggs's systematic extortion. And Silas Granger, Harlan said, his voice rising, a witness to the attack. Silas walked to the front. He was bruised, his arm in a sling Clara had made, his ribs taped. He looked like he had been through a war. He looked at the townsfolk. He looked at Briggs. Then he looked at Clara. I am Silas Granger, he said, his voice hoarse. I was a soldier. I fought at Cold Harbor. I know what killing is. What happened at that ranch? It was not attempted murder. It was defense. He told them about the fire. He told them about the shovel, about the boot aimed at his head. She saved my life. Those men, they weren't collecting a debt. They were trying to burn a woman out of her home. At the order. And he pointed, his arms shaking. Of that man, Hollis Briggs. Briggs just smiled, a cold, thin smile. And the other, the judge asked, his voice soft. The matter of her husband. Silas's gaze never left Clara's. I know what she told me, that her husband was a violent man, that he broke her ribs, that he tried to sell her. If she did what she had to do to save her own life, then that is not murder. That is survival. And this is not a town. It is a pack of wolves. And you are all standing by, watching him. He pointed at Briggs again. Eat these women alive. Shame on you. Shame on you all. He was done. He was trembling. He went and stood behind Clara, his hand on her shoulder. The judge was silent. The room was so quiet they could hear the horses shifting outside. Hollis Briggs, the judge said. Step forward. Briggs' smile vanished. He stepped forward. I have heard testimony, the judge said, of a pattern of coercion, of threats, of violence. I am a federal judge. This court, this store, is now a federal court. I am very interested in your methods. Sir, I am hereby ordering a full investigation into your land acquisitions. And as for you, Sheriff Brody, you're enthusiastic. Arrest seems highly suspect. I will be looking into your accounts as well. Briggs was pale. Brody was sweating. As for you, Mrs. Voss, the judge said, his voice softening. Regarding the death of your husband, there is no body. There is no proof. There is only hearsay and the confession of a terrified, brutalized woman. I find no cause for a trial. The charge of murder is dismissed. Clara gasped, her legs almost giving out. Silas held her steady. As for the shooting of Tom Grimes, given the testimony, I find it was a clear act of defense, of her property, and of Mr. Granger. You are cleared of that too. Clara wept, her head falling forward. But, the judge said, his voice stern, this town, this county, it is not safe for you. I have seen what happens. I cannot post a marshal here to protect you. I have warned Mr. Briggs, but men like him, they have long memories. And these people, he looked at the whispering townsfolk, have short ones. They have judged you in their own way. I am advising you, strongly, to leave this place. Sell your land, go somewhere new, start again. This is the only justice I can offer you. The court was dismissed. The crowd filed out, silent, avoiding Briggs's eyes. Clara and Silas were left alone in the emporium, the sun slanting through the dusty windows. She had been cleared, And she had lost everything. That night, she was back at the ranch. The field was a black, smoking ruin. The barn loft had a hole in it where the hay had caught. It was all gone. She was in the small house, packing. For real. This time, she had her small satchel. She was packing the few things that were hers, a tintype of her mother, a small wooden bird her father had carved. "What are you doing?" Silas was standing in the doorway. He was battered, but he was standing.
"I'm leaving,"
she said, her voice dead.
"Like the judge said, it's over. He won. Briggs won. He gets the land. I'll just go."
"Where?"
"I don't know. West, Oregon, somewhere, where no one knows my name."
She finished packing and walked past him, out the door. Her shoulders slumped. He did not follow her. She walked to the barn, the place where it had all begun. She stood by the massive door, the one she had barred. Her hand rested on the thick wood. This was the end. Then he was there. He moved so fast, so silent. She didn't hear him. 1 second she was alone, the next he was in front of her, his big body blocking the door, his hand slamming against the wood next to her head. He pressed her back against the door, his body trapping hers. He was not angry. He was something else, something fierce and claiming. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. "Silas, it's over. Let me go." "I am not letting you go." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. His eyes were burning, all the pain and fear and hope swirling in them. "You saved me first. Clara." "What?" "In this barn, when you told me your secrets, when you read that letter, you saved me from my ghosts. Now I'm saving you from yours." And he kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of their first time. It was not the slow, sorrowful kiss of the loft. It was a kiss of possession. It was urgent and claiming and final. It was a brand. It was the sealing of a promise made in fire and in fear. He was not just kissing her. He was claiming her, her past, her pain, her future. He was claiming it all. And she, in that dark barn, against the door that had once been her prison, kissed him back, and she was, finally, free. The kiss in the barn was a sealing. It was the end of the argument, the end of the fear, and the beginning of the long, hard road. When they broke apart, breathless, the air in the dark barn was changed. It was no longer a prison or a fortress. It was just a building, and they were leaving it. They did not talk for a long time. They simply began. The decision was made. They slept one last night in the loft, not in passion, but in a weary, solid truce. Their bodies curled together against the chill. Two survivors on a raft. Before dawn, Silas rose. He moved with a quiet, grim purpose. He gave Clara the small pouch of coin, the one he'd received for the hay. "Buy what we need," he said. "Flour, bacon, coffee, salt, ammunition. Get it from the Emporium. Harlan's note to the judge will keep them civil. I'll be back by dark." "Back from where?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Selling my life," he said. He rode his wagon, the one he had hauled over the mountains, into Sweetwater. He did not look at the sheriff's office. He went straight to the livery. He sold the wagon, his big, sturdy freight wagon, for half what it was worth. And then, in the hardest act of his life, he sold Jed and Samson. He sold his mules. He took the man's coin, his hand steady, and he did not look back as he heard them bray, confused, from the stall. His past was truly dead. With the money, he bought a team of 4 stout oxen, slow and patient, and he bought a small, sturdy prairie schooner, its canvas patched but sound. It was not the wagon of a drifter, a hay seller. It was the wagon of a homesteader, a farmer, a family. He led the slow, plodding team out of town. While he was gone, Clara did her own burying. She walked from the small sod house, her steps firm. She went to the single gnarled apple tree by the barn, the only thing on the property that Martin had not planted, and had thus not managed to kill. In her hand, she held the thin gold band Martin had put on her finger. It felt cold, a manacle. She did not just drop it. She knelt in the dirt where Silas had stood to defend her, and she dug a hole with her bare hands, scraping away the rocks and dry earth. She dug until her nails were broken and packed with soil. She looked at the ring one last time, a symbol of her bondage, her fear, and her shame. Then she dropped it in the hole. She covered it. She packed the earth down with her palms, and she walked away. She did not wash her hands. When Silas returned at dusk, leading the oxen, she was waiting. Her small satchel was by the door. The supplies he'd asked for were packed in crates. She looked at the slow, plodding beasts, so different from his fast, strong mules. She looked at him, his face set like stone. He had given up his freedom, his trade, for her. She just nodded. The food is ready. They loaded the wagon in silence. They did not take much, a few pots, the blankets, their rifles and the ammunition, the tin box of her mother's. She did not even look back at the house. He set a small bag of feed for the oxen, and they climbed onto the bench. Silas clicked his tongue, and the heavy wagon groaned. The wheels turning, they pulled out of the yard, past the smoking, blackened field, past the listing barn, past the small apple tree, and pointed the wagon west. They did not look back. The land was hard. It was not the forgiving green of the east. It was a vast, crushing ocean of sagebrush, rock, and sky. They traveled for weeks, the wagon's slow pace a torture. A fast rider could make 30 miles in a day. They were lucky to make 10. The oxen were steady, but they were a living clock, ticking at a funereal pace. They followed the trail west, but they were weeks behind the last of the season's emigrants. They were alone. The land emptied them. The first 2 weeks, they talked. They spoke of the trial, of Briggs, of the town. They picked the wounds clean, but the land did not care for their past. The wind, a constant, whining presence, scoured the words from their mouths. Soon, their talk turned to practical things. Water, grazing for the oxen, the state of the wagon's axle, their life pared down to its essentials: wood, water, food, warmth. In the high passes of the Rockies, the first snow caught them. It was not a gentle dusting. It was a sudden, violent blizzard, an early taste of the winter to come. It trapped them for 4 days in a high canyon, the snow drifting up past the wagon wheels. They huddled in the back of the wagon, all their blankets piled on top of them. The wind screaming. It was a cold that got into the bones. They lay face to face, her nose tucked under his chin, their shared breath a small, vital cloud in the freezing air. He held her, his big body a furnace, and he felt the small, fine tremors that ran through her. She was not afraid. She was just cold. I think I preferred the barn, she whispered, her teeth chattering. The barn was warmer. He agreed, his voice a low rumble in her ear. But the company's better. When the snow broke, they pushed on, down into the great empty basin. The snow turned to mud, and the mud was worse. The oxen strained, the wagon sinking to its hubs. Silas and Clara yoked themselves to it, alongside the animals, their shoulders against the wood, fighting for every single foot of ground. They were covered in mud, their muscles screaming, their lungs raw. But they did it. They did it together. And when the wagon pulled free onto a rocky, dry patch of land, they did not celebrate. They just collapsed, breathing hard, side by side in the muck. He looked at her, her face streaked with mud, her hair matted. He had never seen anything more beautiful. Hunger came next. The bacon ran out, then the flour. Silas, the hay seller, had to become a hunter. He had never been a good shot. He missed a deer, the bullet whining harmlessly off the rock. He missed a sage grouse. They ate boiled water, flavored with the last of the coffee grounds. The hunger made them sharp with each other. It made the silence heavy. But one evening, he returned to the wagon, not empty-handed. He was carrying 2 skinny rabbits. Clara, who had been sitting, staring blankly at the fire, burst into tears. She cried with relief. He knelt, skinned the rabbits with his knife, and she cooked them, every last piece in their pot. They ate slowly, savoring every stringy, tough bite. It was a feast. They were alive. They crossed into the Idaho Territory, a vast, unmapped, and lawless place, and it was there that the fever found her. It started with a chill, in the middle of a hot, dry afternoon. She shivered, pulling her blanket tight. By nightfall, she was burning. Silas made camp, his movements jerky with a new, cold panic. This was not Briggs. This was not a blizzard. This was an enemy he could not see, an enemy he could not fight. For 3 days, she was out of her mind. He parked the wagon by a small, sluggish creek, and he did not leave her side. He tore a strip from their last clean sheet and bathed her face, her neck, her arms. The water was tepid, but it seemed to steam on her skin. She fought him. She did not know him. In her delirium, she was back in Wyoming. "No, Martin," she whimpered, her hands pushing at his chest. "Don't, please, don't hit me." "It's Silas," he said, his voice thick, his heart breaking. "Clara, it's me. It's Silas. You're safe." But she could not hear him. She screamed, a thin, terrible sound that the empty land swallowed. He held her down, gently but firmly, his own tears streaming, until the fit passed. "I've got you," he whispered, over and over. "I'm right here. You're safe." He forced water between her cracked lips, a spoonful at a time. He did not sleep. He sat, his rifle across his knees, and watched her breathe, watched her fight this invisible demon. He had faced cannon fire at Cold Harbor, but he had never known fear like this. The thought of being alone again. It was not just a fear. It was an impossibility. It was a cold, black void he could not, face. On the 3rd night, the fever reached its crisis. She was rigid, her body arched, a low moan in her throat. He thought he was losing her. He knelt by her pallet in the wagon, his head bowed, his hands gripping the wood, and he prayed. He was not a praying man. He did not know who he was praying to. He just begged. "Take me," he whispered into the dark. "Not her. She's earned her peace. Take me." He sat there until the first gray light of dawn. The moaning had stopped. He was terrified to look. He thought she was gone. But then he heard a sound, a quiet. "Silas?" He looked up. Her eyes were open. They were clear. The fever was gone. She was pale, so pale, her skin almost translucent. She was weak, but she was her. He choked, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He could not speak. She looked at him. She saw the 3-day growth of beard, the red-rimmed, hollow eyes, the way his big frame was slumped with exhaustion. She saw the pure, unfiltered love and terror on his face. She smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "You look terrible." "Husband." The word, it hit him. Husband. Not in a delirium, not in a dream. She had said it. It was a simple word, but it was a vow. It was an anchor. It was the name of the man he had become. He wept. He laid his head on her stomach, his broad shoulders shaking. And he wept for the first time since he was a boy in the mud. He cried for Eliza, for the men he'd lost, for Martin, for her. She was too weak to hold him. She just let her hand rest in his hair. That night, she fell into a deep, healing sleep. The fever was truly broken. Silas sat by the fire, his heart a slow, steady, painful beat in his chest. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred. He looked at her, sleeping in the wagon. He looked at her left hand, resting on the blanket. It was bare. He pulled his skinning knife from its sheath. He found a piece of dry cottonwood, left by the creek. He began to carve. He was not an artist. His hands were made for hauling, for fighting, for building, but he worked slowly, all night, by the light of the fire. He did not try to make it beautiful. He just tried to make it true. He carved a simple, thick band of wood. When he was done, he sat by the creek's edge, sanding it with a smooth river stone, rubbing it with a bit of axle grease to make it shine. He worked until the sun came up. When she woke, he was there. He had a tin cup of weak broth for her. She drank it, her hands shaking. She was going to live. He said nothing. He just opened his big calloused palm. In the center of it sat the wooden ring. It was simple. It was rough. It was perfect. She looked at the ring. Then she looked at his face, at his tired, loving eyes. Tears welled in her own. She did not wait for him to offer it. She did not wait for him to ask. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and she took the ring from his palm. And slowly, with a steady, certain movement, she slid it onto the third finger of her left hand. It fit. She closed her hand into a fist. Holding it tight, she was Clara Granger. They found their valley 2 weeks later. It was near the Salmon River, a place the trail had passed by. It was hidden, tucked between 2 high mesas, and a clear, fast-running creek cut right through the middle of it. It was green. It was full of grass. It was just as she had dreamed. There were other homesteaders, 3 families, spread out miles apart. They were not like the people of Sweetwater. They were not judges or gossips. They were survivors. They saw the look in Silas's and Clara's eyes. They saw their patched wagon and their own worn-out clothes, and they helped. They came together for a cabin raising. The men cut the pine, and the women cooked. In 2 days, they had a house. It was a single room, with a real stone fireplace and a floor of rough-hewn planks. It smelled of fresh-cut pine and clean earth. It was home. That winter was hard, but they were not alone. They survived. Spring came, and Silas, with the help of his neighbors, began to break the sod for a field. He built a real corral. He started hauling lumber to build a proper barn. One evening, he was late. He was returning from the woods, the oxen pulling a load of fresh-cut logs. He was tired, the good, bone-deep tiredness of a day's hard work. He smelled the wood smoke from their chimney. He saw her. She was not on the porch, waiting. She was standing in the middle of their new yard, by a small patch of dirt where she had started a garden. She was not looking for him. She was watching the sky, watching the hawk circle in the last, golden light of the day. The land was green around her. The cabin was solid behind her. She was wearing a simple calico dress, and the evening breeze pressed it against her. Her hands were not idle. They were resting, one on top of the other, on her belly. He stopped the oxen and just watched her. She was whole. She heard the wagon stop and turned, a slow, easy smile touching her face. "You're late," she said. Her voice was calm, happy. Silas looked at her, at the way the setting sun lit her hair, at the unmistakable, gentle swell of her body. He smiled, a slow, wide smile that reached his eyes. "And you're glowing," he replied. He walked to her. They did not kiss. They did not embrace. They just stood, side by side, his hand finding hers. His rough fingers curled around the smooth, worn wood of her ring. They stood there, 2 survivors, scarred by the lives they had led, but finally, terribly, beautifully whole. The land behind them, the land in Wyoming, had burned, but the land in front of them, this valley, was growing, and so were they. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories just like this one. We value your thoughts, so please share them with us in English. We look forward to reading your comments.